Well, my dear friends, it's finally here. The Acolyte episode 3 just dropped, and it's time for another breakdown and review. I want to start by saying this. I've noticed, already with discussions in the fandom surrounding this episode, we're very divided. There are those who say this was the best episode of the season so far, and those saying it's the worst. Whether you loved or hated it, just remember to be civil to one another and kind. We're all Star Wars fans, and we want the best for this franchise. And I know, no matter what my opinion, there are going to be those who disagree and say I'm completely off base, but we're a fandom of various perspectives, takes, opinions, and all civil discussion is more than welcome here in our community. So with that said, my dear friends, let's discuss The Acolyte Episode 3 Destiny. Right off the bat, unlike the first two, there is no double title for this episode, because the twins are together. It's their past, it's a flashback. We finally found out what took place 16 years ago on Brendok. So, was it as bad as some of the reviewers were saying? Did it break or destroy Star Wars canon? Were there retcons? Well, we'll get into that. My own raw thoughts. This episode, while it does have some merit, it wasn't really for me. And there were some Star Wars lore decisions I really don't like. But, as you know, I like to be balanced, so I'm going to give it some credit. I'm going to go through the things I liked, and then I'm going to discuss my dislikes. While the scene with the witches explaining their perspective and interpretation of the Force was different, I don't think it's as big of a deal as people think, because this was their perspective. And I don't necessarily think the show is saying, this is what the Force is canonically going forward. I think it's a wrong view of the Force, but I don't think this is Leslye Headland saying this is canon. I think they were trying to show the flawed perspective this witch coven had. So, here's the bit that's strange for me. Leslye Headland was inspired by Anakin's immaculate conception, but in this case, twins born from the Force, not by the will of the Force. So it doesn't change your understanding of the Chosen One, but it does strangely step on the toes of what the likes of Plagueis tried and failed to do, with some of the most intricate knowledge of the dark side of the Force. The witches seem to have succeeded on a whim, and they don't even seem to imply any kind of difficulty or complexity or midichlorians or anything like that. The arduous nature of the dark side power would have taken, one which no one has ever succeeded in doing before. They just explain it away by saying they've got a different view of the Force to the Jedi. And I know Plagueis' story is mostly legends, and this is canon. I'm just not feeling it. I don't like the way they explained it, and the way this fabricated Force dyad is not given any level of intricacy. I mean, we're talking about Sith like Tenebrous and Plagueis, those who mastered the dark side of the Force, and spent decades, if not longer, trying to find a way to manipulate life. They clearly used the dark side to force this to happen. They were trying to show how the Jedi go with the will of the Force, and the dark side tries to manipulate and impose its own will on the Force. Mother Anastasia said this: some call it a force, and claim to use it. Pull the thread, change everything. It ties you to your destiny. It binds you to others. So there is definitely some hyperbole to the controversy surrounding the Force, because this is just one group saying it, and Force cults and denominations throughout legends and canon have absolutely had their own take, often very flawed. I do think this story had a very Old Republic feel to it. It's just the execution I personally didn't like, but you know, if it worked for you, I'm very happy for you because I know many fans did enjoy the way these concepts were handled. Again, staying with the positives, I enjoyed the fact we don't have the full picture. We're 3 episodes in and we still are none the wiser about the truth of some of those events. Did the fire really kill the witches? Because they only showed their bodies, not what took place on the other side of the wall. This, I think, is the Jedi cover-up. We still have no idea why Torbin took the Barash vow, and why Master Sol felt so much sadness. And I don't think it was just sentimental reasons and seeing Osha be so sad that she thinks she lost her sister and her family. So, what is the truth? Well, that has become a very interesting point, and I enjoy the contrast between how others outside the Jedi perceive the Order compared to the truth. The High Republic is a golden era for the Jedi, but there is a dark underbelly, and we're gonna have to wait for episode 4 and beyond to see more of the flashback, to see the truth, because there was something more than just the fire that killed the witches. It's a guilt I'm sure Master Sol feels to this day. I'm also starting to really enjoy the idea that Osha is going to turn to the dark side and be the true acolyte by the end of season 1, and May is going to turn back to the light. I say this because Osha is being portrayed as unbalanced, having vengeance, fear, which Yoda said is a path to the dark side, but I also feel as though we can't trust everything we're seeing, something I've said time and again. It took me a minute, but I realised that the YouTuber Philosophy Tube was in this episode, and I think one of my favourite characters from the episode was the old, wise alien witch, the one who kind of looked like Maz Kanata. You guys know, I do love alien designs. But now we know, my dear friends, May started the fire, but there is more to it. That's what I'm trying to get across. They also drew an enormous parallel to the Path of the Open Hand, a concept from the High Republic books. Also known as the Faithful, they were an extremist, missionary order cult that believed in a prophet, Alicia Severon, also known as the Mother. Just like the Witch Coven in this episode, they were very critical about the way the Jedi used the Force. They believed wielding the Force the way the Jedi did led to disaster and death. I'm also very curious to learn more about the Force dyad, because by the time they're adults, it seems the mantra of the twins is still an important component they're going to return to. But remember, there's also a trauma aspect of it. So now, my dear friends, inevitably onto my criticisms, and I do have a few. As I say, while the story was definitely a strong one, the execution for the budget really didn't hold up. I feel as though so many elements let the episode down. The wide shots and overall environments for Brendok were fine, but I hate to bring this up again. The budget was $180 million. About $22 million went towards this episode, and there's no excuse for the series to look this bland. And remember those photos, those set leaks from a couple of years ago? Those weren't the unfinished look, they were the final product. It just looked uninspired. This is the Star Wars galaxy, and this generic terrestrial planet setting has been done time and time again across various live-action Star Wars shows. And you might say, well, yeah, but it's just one planet. I'd agree with you if this was the first time, but it's an ongoing issue I have with Disney Plus Star Wars shows. Lucas gave us incredibly imaginative and immersive sci-fi worlds like Camino, Geonosis, Mustafar, and many others. And even when they were terrestrial, they had a twist. Now, admittedly, we have gotten one or two cool planets in the Disney era, but for a mysterious witch coven in exile, Earth 2.0 doesn't scream interesting dark side cult. I mean, the Night Sisters had freaking Dathomir. And I understand, the witches are meant to be in exile, I get it. But still, it didn't grip me. And with a series with this amount of insane creative talent, and one of the best horror composers in the industry, why not utilize all of that as a foundation to be inspired enough to make a setting suitable for a witch cult? And let's talk about the witches. This is the episode we finally see the inspiration from Frozen. The two sisters, their powers, their past, the whole initiation ceremony, the ascension, and one of the twins not following the conventional traditional path and not wanting to adhere to those ideals and instead wants to become a Jedi. And again, the idea, the concept was good, but the execution let it down. Some of the dialogue threw me off, and I also felt as though the chemistry and the interplay between the characters was very clunky, and upon rewatch I realised it was the way certain lines were delivered. And this might just be my perspective, so again, just realise it's my criticism. I feel as though Leslye Headland's intentions with how she wanted to portray the witches really backfired. In all of the interviews and press for the show, and it's the same with Jodie Turner-Smith, they wanted fans to see an empowered group of strong Force users, but they come across as extremely selfish, insular, narcissistic, and manipulative. I mean, sure, the Jedi are portrayed as kidnappers, but if we were meant to feel any kind of favour or sympathy towards the witches, I definitely didn't. There's a moment near the end of the episode that's meant to be this big shock moment, where I think the intention was for us to feel sad and emotional at the witches' deaths, horrified in the same way we were about the younglings during Order 66. But the episode presented us with two equally questionable Force groups, especially when it comes to how they train younglings. There are some who defend this group and say the Night Sisters are no different. I couldn't disagree more. I know they're different, but the Night Sisters, much more interesting group. Better expansion and world building, they just don't compare. I also think the show suffers from the fact that week to week we can't see the big picture, so fans are going to base their opinion in a vacuum on the most recent episode. And I guess that's expected. And in a vacuum with no further context, I don't think this was the strongest episode. I also found younger Kalnaka's design very interesting. I know he's just a guy in a costume, but there's disparity between the head and the body. I guess this is when Kalnaka was a bit trimmer. But that is my review. Some good, some bad. I wasn't vibing with it as much as I think the second episode, which has so far been my favourite. I'm going to keep covering the show, but I want to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Did you like this episode? Did you not? Why so? And why not? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. May the Force be with you, always.